a community, a new community where one didn't exist before. So we really appreciate all the work you did for that. And thanks to all the brilliant poets I've met. Some of them I've met for the first time. From far and wide, they made the effort to come, so that's just really wonderful. And again, we have a new community, and this is really wonderful. So, and I've also learned that more people are scared of me than I realized was the case over the last couple of days, because I'm a literary critic in addition to being a poetry and fiction writer. So I've strayed from the straight path. So anyway, is this okay? Is the mic okay? Yeah? Okay. I was asked by this Nigerian-American poet, Abayomi Animoshan, I hope I'm saying the name right, and he just asked a question of a number of poets like Fadi Judah, Zubair Ahmed, and a lot of accomplished and emerging poets. The question, how do you see yourself as an immigrant poet? And of course, being who I am, I thought, I'm not an immigrant poet. And that's how I'm going to take on the question. And I'm kind of serious about that, because until you asked me that question, I had never thought of myself ever as an immigrant writer or poet. I really hadn't. And so I wrote this essay called Why I Am Not an Immigrant Poet. And I have got copies of it here, so if you're interested, you can pick it up. And again, to make it more complicated for myself, because that's who I am, I could have just sort of given you the highlights of the essay and my main points. But I'm going to try to, I stand by the essay, but I'm going to qualify it and sort of, modify it a little bit. The point of the essay is, I have a deep problem with multiculturalism, and when I say that, people think, he's just Rush Limbaugh, this is a right-wing, position, but I've always critiqued multiculturalism from the very left perspective, extreme left. You can call me an anarchist, like way out left. So that's my angle on multiculturalism, and it's problematic to me because it seems to me that the bargain that's been made in this country is, especially the last 15, 20 years, since the end of the Cold War, is we give you this multiculturalism, and you, immigrants, people of color, minorities of any kind, shut up about economic justice. Shut up about economic issues, and you can keep your culture and make a fetish of it or whatever. That's okay. Just don't go there. So I have a problem with that bargain, and I think multiculturalism doesn't have to be that way. You can have pride in your culture and identity. That's fine, but not if it comes at this cost. So to the extent that immigrant writing and immigrant poetry fits into that larger scheme of thinking, I have a problem with that. And I think multiculturalism as it's practiced now, or multicultural writing or poetry, fits really well into neoliberal capitalism, with neoliberal thinking in general, and what I would call neoliberal literary industry. And I was reading Pramila's essay last night on some immigrant poets, South Asian poets, and I think she's picking up on this very well. Along the same lines, she's talking about the immigrant poet self-exoticizing. If you define yourself as the other, I think that's kind of a trap that neoliberal capitalism is really. I hope when I say neoliberal capitalism, people aren't scared. Sometimes, when I go to newspapers and magazines, I go, just don't say neoliberal. Just don't say that. Or neo-fascist, whatever. Don't use that terminology. So anyway, when you define yourself as the other, to me, that's a problem. Also, when I wrote this essay, I had an issue with diaspora, that term. And the origin of the term is, of course, the Jewish diaspora. Actually, it goes back even before that to the Greeks. But the modern usage is from the Jewish diaspora. And the sense of exile and forced, departure, and constantly yearning for the homeland, and hoping that one day you'll go back to the homeland, and romanticizing and sentimentalizing the homeland, those are key elements of the definition of diaspora. Now diaspora has become completely diluted, like everything and everyone is diaspora. So I think we should be clear about that I want to make a distinction between immigration, migrants, often privileged migrants, versus exile, or diaspora. Those are different things. And I want to say that So I had a problem with what I would consider false nostalgia, false sentimentality. That's what I argued against in this essay. But then I started thinking, well, if you are engaging in sentimentality or romanticization, what's so wrong with that? So that's just, another sort of thought that occurred to me. I took a stand in this essay that you cannot be in between always. You have to take a stand in history. You are located in a specific time and place. And I said in this essay, you are by definition a citizen of a place. So I was arguing in this essay, well, I believe in this necessity, I believe in this pragmatism, and to the extent that multicultural poetry or immigrant poetry is an escape from that, I have an issue with that. But again, I would say, well, if you are ahistorical, and if you want to be outside history and outside context and place, what's so wrong about that? Immigrant versus exile, I mentioned that, is it against the will? So the question then comes in, who do we write for? And I think a lot of my conceptual, my ideas, often they come back to the question of audience. Who is the audience? Who are we writing for? And that's a very important part here too when we think about immigrant poetry, diaspora, exile, forced departure, yearning for the homeland, nostalgia, sentimentality, all of that. Who are we writing for? And I don't claim that I have an answer or for any of these things. I'm just, throwing some of this stuff out there. Also the question, Usha was asking me at a reading a couple of years ago about how much I know about Urdu poetry or my tradition, and I said I really don't know, except when Salim Piradina starts singing, and then it just, my primitive, this just kicks in, and I'm like, yeah, I know this stuff, So he triggers that. But the question is, can you have multiple worldviews in your head, the East, the West, at the same time? And how does that question, this question of immigrant poet? The lack of division, I talked about the lack of division within myself in this essay. That's just not true at all, so I take that back. I said that I feel alienated from Urdu poetry in general, or South Asian poetry. I think that's still true. I don't feel that about Chinese poetry. It could be that through modernism, through Ezra Pound and so on, we've assimilated Chinese poetry in an imagistic, modernist way, so maybe I don't feel alienated from that. So that's a thought that occurred to me. Immigrant poetry as a subset of confessionalism. And I have very serious problems with, as Keiki was saying, with confessionalism as therapy. So to the extent that becomes sort of a perpetual ghetto of the mind in a way, like your cultural identity, this confessional, perpetual sorrow and so on, I have a problem with immigrant poetry in that sense as well. Immigrant as nostalgia generating machine. What I do like is immigrant poetry as voice of justice, which I think was more true of the Jewish literature, Jewish poets, Jewish diaspora, and other diasporas. That I'm very comfortable with. Degree of illicitness. Illicitness, I had a talk with, I talked to Changre Lee, the fiction writer, once about this, and I think now I'm sort of getting to the positive side of, immigrant writing, immigrant poetry, what I like. So the sense of being an imposter, sense of being illegal, even if you are legal, I really like that. I think there's something really useful to that. To the extent that the immigrant poet has unrealistically high expectations, utopian expectations of American culture, I am very comfortable with that. I think the immigrant poetry, to the extent that it introduces irrationality, inconsistency into this American narrative, this myth, that's wonderful. I like that. I'm just going to end in a second. True autonomy of art from politics. I think the immigrant poet can contribute to that by questioning the placement of art in politics, of which multiculturalism is the most overt expression today. So if you don't fit in that niche, I think that's great, because then you've created something new as an immigrant poet. Immigration is about brokenness. And immigrant poets, I don't think, should try to heal the brokenness within themselves, including shame, guilt, and unjustified pride. I think that you write great poetry if you allow these to persist and try not to heal the divisions and make yourself whole. I know that sounds contradictory and perhaps irrational, but that's my take on it. And that may be a way of escaping the self-definition that they want to impose on us as this separate thing, that once you define yourself that way, then the effort to understand us or this real communication no longer needs to take place, because we are taking this niche and just running away with that. But if you introduce this irrationality and inconsistency and this radical kind of questioning, which I think immigrants are ideally positioned to do, then that's great. That's a great contribution. So I'll just end with that. Thank you.